if you're caught up on some of your video game trivia, you probably saw this one coming. Sweet Home basically owes 90% of the people who know it, only know it because it's what created the Resident Evil franchise. Again, like I mentioned yesterday, Sweet Home was adapted into a video game on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Capcom, when the PlayStation came around, they wanted to make a horror game for it. Their initial idea was to make another Sweet Home game. Remake the one that they made on the NES, spruce it up, new graphics, all that jazz. The problem being is that licensing could not be agreed upon between them and the license holders, and the deal ultimately fell through. Well, they still had a lot of assets pre-made. They had a lot of things already set in stone. So they decided to just go ahead and do a completely new IP, completely owned by Capcom, and that eventually ended up being Resident Evil. And Resident Evil is one of the most prosperous horror franchises in video games, if not in media as a whole. It spawned numerous games, a couple movies, all of them are crap. I'm not even going to talk about any of the movies. The live action ones, the 3D ones, the new reboot, all of them are dog shit. I like some of the 3D ones. But that's still not if you're not into playing the video games, you should watch the 3D movies. No. You should only watch the 3D movies if you already enjoy the games. That is an auxiliary for the people who enjoy the video games. That is not an alternate option for people who don't play video games whatsoever. And the live-action movies, again, all of them are dog shit. None of them are worth your time. Don't watch them. Not worth it. And then there's a Netflix series, which I haven't watched, but I've heard nothing but bad things about. Just nothing but bad things about. So I'm just going to take the internet's word for that one and say, you're good. So back on to video games. Resident Evil 1 obviously sells really well. I didn't play it. Not only was I very young, if not alive at the time, it just really wasn't my thing. Where I came into the series was Resident Evil 2. This is my game. I love this game. Comes out a few years later after numerous prototyping stages and drastic different changes and whatever. But I didn't play it initially on the PS1. I played it on the PlayStation Portable, which was just this nifty little device that could play, theoretically, all PlayStation games. But mine wasn't hacked at the time, so I had to buy it from the store, blah, blah, blah. It was one of those games that really hooked me in right from the get-go. One of those games that you stay up late playing under the covers when you're supposed to be in bed and your mom has no idea, and you're just shooting zombies to your heart's content. It was a very, very fun time, and I still have very fond memories of Resident Evil 2, and I very much enjoy it. Next up, there was a bit of an issue, and there's dozens of fan theories about what's going on, but nobody knows the true story of it. Regardless, the next game to be announced, I believe, was Code Veronica on the Dreamcast, but PlayStation still had a legality deal saying that the third game should be on their console, so they changed Resident Evil Nemesis to Resident Evil 3, and then what was going to be Resident Evil 3 Code Veronica to just Resident Evil Code Veronica. I don't know. I have played 3. I didn't beat it. I've played Code Veronica. I believe I got to like disc 2. The issue with the games up until this point has been the tank controls. I don't mind tank controls personally, but sometimes it's a bit difficult to get into. Something that not a lot of people are a fan of. If you don't know what tank controls are, so the Resident Evil games, they're not fully 3D mapped out environments like this. It's a static picture on your screen, and your character, who is a 3D model, is moving around in front of that. So it'll be like a picture of a room, and your character is moving around as if they're in that room, but they're not. They're on a plane of existence in 3D existence in front of that picture. But things are masked off so that when you step behind them, you're blocked out. Blah 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 blah. All complicated mumbo jumbo. So to do that, you have to do tank controls. There are some games with analog so the difference between tank and analog is when you press forward on the controller, your character moves forward. No matter which direction he's facing, they move forward. Analog would be you move the stick in whichever direction you want your character to go. I know that probably doesn't make a lot of sense to people who don't understand, and the people who already understand, I'm just reiterating things that you already know, whatever. So, except for like a single PlayStation game that was like a first-person shooter, all of the games up until this point have been static. Have been tank controls. And then Capcom strikes this deal with Nintendo to make a completely new game from the ground up, a remake of the first Resident Evil on their new GameCube console. I don't have the original. I have the remake of it on the PlayStation 4, along with Resident Evil 0. These two games are pretty good. I'm more partial to the remake of Resident Evil 1. Resident Evil 0 is a bit iffy. It's got a few things in it that I'm not a personal fan of, but that's whatever. So this big Capcom deal comes out, and the game that they follow it up with, there's a lot of things about that Capcom deal that is wild, but what they do after that is this game, Resident Evil 4. And a lot of people say that this is the best in the series, and frankly, I agree with them. This game is wildly good. So this shifts, instead of doing the tank controls, the static cameras that all the other games up until this point have done, Resident Evil 4 opts to put the camera behind the main character, Leon. And it works really well. Of course, this brings into question if this spawned, the cover-based shooters and how much action was involved in this, what's supposed to be a horror franchise. I don't know. It's a wildly fun time. I still think that the first few chapters are really scary. It's a fun game. Resident Evil gets kind of off on a tangent from that point forward, definitely delving more into action-type games than anything else. There are a few horror-ish video games, but at least as far as the mainline series go, Resident Evil 5 is pretty much just a straight action game. Just pure action. Just action. It has creepy monsters in it, but I still just wouldn't put this one in the same category as the others as far as moments when I'm genuinely terrified. It doesn't work for me. Resident Evil 6 is more of the same. I don't even have that one. And for a while they get into this action-focused mode of operating until they make a game called Resident Evil Revelations. And Resident Evil Revelations is really good. It was initially released on 3DS. I have the re-release on the PS4. This game is pretty fun. This one goes back to those roots of horror gameplay. It is behind-the-shoulder shooting, like Resident Evil 4, but it's still, I wouldn't say that it has that element of action that Resident Evil 4 introduces, especially in the later chapters. I mean, if you can see the footage behind me, he's kind of mowing down natives left and right. They're not natives, but they're natives. Revelations is good. Revelations 2 is also good, but it's still not roping in the old crowd yet. They're still having issues, people saying that it's too actiony, and honestly, those people aren't wrong. And then Resident Evil 7 comes out. Or Biohazard. I haven't talked about the naming differences in Japan and America, and you know what, I'm not going to. But Resident Evil 7 is really good. It's first person. It's a completely new gameplay style. It's not behind the shoulder. You are in the perspective of the main character. And this launched alongside PlayStation's PlayStation VR system. And so that really helped to sell it, because now you've got this whole other addition of, not only are you playing a Resident Evil game, you're playing a Resident Evil game in virtual reality. You know, it's that added depth to really suck you in, that I think a lot of people, that's what a lot of people were interested in. And it worked really well. But rewinding to the Resident Evil 1 remake on GameCube, I've already talked about it. For a while, people were wondering if Resident Evil 2 was going to get remade. Nothing came out about it. There were a few rumors here and there, until finally they did. Finally, they remade Resident Evil 2 on the PlayStation 4 in this style of gameplay. It's not tank controls like the first Resident Evil remake was. It's third-person action shooter. But this game is very still scary. I think that this remake is the gold standard of remakes. I think that it almost tops the original as far as me being engrossed in it goes. It is a wildly good game. And then they do the same for Resident Evil 3, also a fun game. A lot of people were really complaining about the shortness of the game, as well as the fact that it didn't have a lot of the following sections. There's large chunks of Resident Evil 2 where a big bulky man is following you throughout this mansion. People were expecting that in Resident Evil 3, and it didn't happen, but it's still good. I still think it's good. They just didn't have that. And then after Resident Evil 3, they did Resident Evil 8, or Village. This one's really fun, and this one adds more of a werewolf vampire twist on the game, as opposed to just zombies, and I think it works really well. It's also first person, same as Resident Evil 7, and it follows some of the it follows the same story that one told, just expanding on it. I think that one's really good. Otherwise, Resident Evil's been pretty good for me lately. I think it's really gotten out of a funk that it was in previously. I think that it is stellar. I think it's a great franchise. Summarizing, don't watch the movies. Don't watch any of the movies. Unless you already like the games and you want a little bit extra, you can watch the CG movies, but don't go expecting like really wildly good things out of it. It's a fun game. It's a fun cast of characters. If you've never played one, I don't know what hole you're living in. If you already play video games and you haven't played a Resident Evil game, if you played horror video games specifically and you haven't played a Resident Evil game, that's kind of weird to me. But I'm not going to judge you, I guess. It's a fun series, and I recommend that you check it out if you haven't. Blah, blah, blah. This is me talking about Resident Evil. That's all this video was. I don't even know who I'm recommending this game to, because blah, 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 blah.